Good morning. Today's daf is daf Kuf Yud Tet. We are near the bottom of Kuf Yud Chet. Let me share my screen and we'll get started. So, yesterday and the day before, we've learned and we've been discussing the concepts of yad, a handle, something non-edible attached to food that allows one to hold the food, a stem, a drumstick, things of that sort. We'll see some more examples at the end of today. And a shomer, something that actually protects the food in a way, a shell, a covering, some sort of helmet to the food, can protect the food. They have similar laws, but they're not identical. Both a yad and a shomer will convey tuma to the food, meaning that they will contract tuma. And that is true, even though they are not food and would not otherwise be capable of becoming tameh, and they are able to convey tuma from the food to other things. So what they differ in is that a shomer counts towards towards the egg size amount of food necessary to convey tuma, while a yad does not. So even a shomer, however, does not count towards the measurement of an olive size of nevela. So when we're talking about tame food, we mean food that became tame from an outside source. If it was inherently tame because of nevela, then then although a yad and a shomer will convey. There's no need to contract tuma because the nevela is an av, so it will convey tuma. It is not going to you don't have to add, it won't add to the volume of nevela in order to ensure that there's an olive size of nevela, which is the minimum amount in order to convey tuma. So with this
Question.
yes,
Okay.
please.
When we say non-edible, non-edible for humans, I presume, because there are things that are edible for animals that are not edible for humans.
Yeah, I think yes, we're talking about edible for humans. And I note the point is that if the yad is edible or if the shomer is edible, then it's not a necessary thing because it's part of the food, underlying
Right.
food itself. So that's the reason that I reference non-edible. You're absolutely right that the yad or the shomer could be edible, but then it's not any chiddush that it's going to convey food to something that it's attached to, and it's not any chiddush that it's going to, convey food elsewhere. If it's attached to something, we don't have, with the exception of rabbinically, we don't have partial tuma. If something is tameh, the whole object is tameh. The only exception is the rabbinic tuma that we associate with our hands. That's why we wash al yadayim, is because we consider our hands sort of tameh, even though our body is not. That's why you don't need to go to the mikvah every time you have a motzi. It's just a rabbinic requirement. So with that as the obvious caveat, we don't have partial tuma, and so that's why this concept. That's why I mention the fact that it's not edible. The truth is of course, these rules also would apply if it's edible, but it would apply because it becomes food, and so therefore is part of it. So that's the way I'm understanding it. And given the fact that we're talking about things like shells and bones, and obviously there are some animals that eat those kinds of things, and so as a result, that's why I'm pretty confident that we're talking about human edibility as opposed to animal edibility. All right, so with this background, I think we're ready to get started again. We'll pick up from the seventh line from the bottom of Kuf Yud Chet Amabet, where it says Amarav. So let's find it in my own Gemara. So here we go. One, two, three, four, five, six, seven. Amarav. Second word on the line. So Amarav. Ein yad lufachot mikazayas. That now we're going to talk about how much food has to exist for there to be a handle. Meaning, although you need to have an egg size of volume in order for there to be something to convey tuma to something else, when we talk about the item's ability to accept tuma through the yad? Is there a minimum amount that that of actual food, or do we say no? There's no. Who cares how much food it is? As long as there's any food, that food will become tameh as a result of the yad. Because again, of course, the yad does not add to the food volume. So the ain shomer. So again, according to Rav, there's no yad if there's less than an olive's volume of food, and the ain shomer lefachot mi kifol, and there's no shomer, a protector, which means that in order to be able to add to the volume of the food, you need to have at least a pole size volume that is a medium-sized bean or some kind of bean. We'll see exactly more details about it because there's definitely a smaller bean that we'll see in a moment during the course of today. But let's take a look at Rashi. First, we'll do the Rashi. It's one, two, three, 6 lines up in the narrow lines in the medium lines of Rashi. Pol pachod harbe mikazais. This pole, this bean, is much smaller than an olive. So that's important point number one. And then go down to the second to last of the medium wide lines of Rashi near the end of the line. V'chein ein shomer lepachot mikafol. Lo hitztaref le'inyan kibetza, meaning that if in fact the shomer is very thick. So, for example, you've got bone around marrow, and it's very thick bone, and so as a result, you have an egg size of bone plus marrow. But even though you have that, if the marrow is less than a large bean, than this bean called the pole, so then that's not going to the shomer, the bone that's around it, is not going to add and create the egg size. Velola hachnis ulahotzi. It will neither, therefore, contract tuma, nor will it convey tuma. Kagon etzem ubo moach pachot mikavol. An example is when you have a bone that has relatively little marrow in it. That would be an example where the bone can be enough to create an egg volume, but if the marrow inside it is less than a bean, well, then it's not going to aggregate, and therefore it will not. The shomer will not be able to contract tuma to the pole, nor will it be able to convey tuma from the pole, from the bean. Vehu im ochlin kebetza o adashin. Okay, and that's where, again, the we're talking about the food that would be the size of an egg, or another example, adashim b'shar b'teyen, or you have small lentils in their pods. And so as a result, the pods are protectors and therefore would constitute a shomer. And so again, would count towards the volume. And yet, if you only have one adasha, one lentil, which is smaller than we will see, is smaller than a pole, so it's then it would not count, and it would not be able to contract or convey tuma as a result of the shomer. So that is the position of Rav. Now we have Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Yesh Yad L'Pachot Mikazayis. No, who cares about the size? A yad can exist even with something smaller than a kazayis. And v'yesh shomer lebachot mikafol, and who cares about the size with respect to a shomer? So the examples that we just gave, where you have a very thick pod or a very thick bone around a very small amount of lentil or a very small amount of marrow, according to Rabbi Yochanan, it would be a shomer, and it would contract tuma if something tameh touched the pod or the bone, and it would convey tuma if the pole were tameh. It would convey if the marrow. If the adasha was tameh or the marrow was tameh, the pod and the bone would convey tuma to something else. So we're going to now offer a series of 4 challenges to Rav. Now these challenges are funny in the sense that that we're going to effectively say that one opinion is inconsistent with Rav, And of course, on some level, we could have just said, well, he's just consistent with the other opinion. And in fact, that's effectively what we're going to answer in a bunch of these cases. But in any event, Tosfos at the top of Kuf Yud Tet makes this point and just notes the fact that while we could answer it, we're trying, we're going through it in detail. So let's take a look. So Meisvei, Shtei Atzamot va'alein Shnei Chatzoi Zesim. So we have two bones, two separate bones. On each bone is a half zayas of meat. So v'hichnis rashein hashniim lebayit. The other end, the second end, meaning the end that doesn't have the flesh on it, is put inside a house. And now, again, we're talking about a corpse, not meat that one is going to eat, but rather a dead body that has a bone and flesh. And so as a result, bones alone are not enough to cause tumah to go throughout the house. But the habayis ma'ayel aleihen, and the house is a roof over these two ends of the bones. Habayit tameh. The house is tameh because the ends of the bones, the non-meat, the non-fleshy ends of the bones, are able to aggregate and convey the tumah on the pieces of the flesh that are outside the house into the house and cause the entire house. V'habayit tameh. The house is tameh. Yehuda ben Nekusa Omer Mishum Rabbi Yaakov Heich Shnei Atzamos Mitztarfim Lekazayis. How can two separate bones combine to create an olive's volume? So that is the brisa. And what we're effectively saying, so as we turn to the top of Kuf Yud Tet Amud Aleph, V'Rav Hai B'mai Okim Law. How do we set this up according to Rav? Ibiyad, if we're talking about a yad, well, he says that there's no yad for less than a kazayis. So as a result, these bones would not constitute a yad and therefore should not convey the tumah of the flesh anywhere. So kashya resha. So the first opinion, the rabbi's opinion, is difficult because the rabbis say that the tumah gets conveyed to the entire house. And shomer, and if you're talking about a shomer, well, then half an olive is, again, remember that a pole is much smaller than an olive, so it's less than half the size of an olive. So a shomer, according to Rav, does exist when you have a half olive size. So as a result, if it's a shomer, well then kashya seva. Now the end of this brisa is difficult because Yehuda ben Nekusa says that the house is tahor, and yet according to Rav, it would convey tumah. So ibayazema b'shomer, ibayazema b'yad. No, we can say that it's like that either this is talking about a shomer or it's talking about a yad. If you want to tell me that it's talking about a yad, Yehuda Amar ki Yehuda ben Nekusa. Well, then Rav is agreeing with Yehuda ben Nekusa, who says that it's less than a kazayis, therefore it doesn't work. A yad doesn't work, and that's why the house is tahor. And if you want, you can say that we're talking about a shomer, Yehuda Amar Tanakama, and then Rav would be like the Tanakama, who says that actually it does convey tumah. So it all works. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Kula biyad. Rabbi Yochanan would say, no, it's all talking about a yad, v'huda amar ketanakama, and he agrees with the Tanakama, namely that even though it's a yad, it is capable of conveying tumah at something that is smaller than an olive, and so smaller than an olive, and so as a result, it's not a problem for Rav at all to just have it be according to a yad. Now, obviously, not a problem at all according to Rabbi Yochanan. He would just agree with the Tanakama, and he would disagree with Rabbi Yehuda ben Nekusa. So that was question number one. Question number two. So Tashma, how about the following brisa? Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kulis sheyesh aleha kazayas basar. You have a thigh bone that has on it a kazayas of flesh. Now, it's not clear, again, is this kazayas of flesh the marrow in it, or is it on top of it? So, goreres kula latuma. It makes the whole thing tameh. Acherim omrim, afilu ein ala ela kapol. Even if it doesn't have on it, even a bean size of a flesh, goreres kula latuma, it can all become tameh. So, the Rav Ahai b'mai mokimla. So again, how does Rav interpret it? Ibiyad, if we're talking about a yad, well then kashya seifa. Then the end is difficult because after all, the end says that it's conveying tuma, even though it doesn't have, even though it has only a bean size amount of flesh on it. And ibishomer, and if we're talking about a shomer, kasheresha, well then the beginning is difficult because it says only if it has an entire olive. And he says that no, even a bean size is sufficient. So Ibai Zema Biyad, Vahuda Amar Karebi Yehuda, Ibai Zema Bishomer, Vahu Kacherim. So either you can say that it's talking about a yad, and so as a result, the relevant threshold is an olive, and he just agrees with the first opinion, Rabbi Yehuda. Or you could say that it's talking about a shomer, and it's exactly what again Rav would say, and it follows the Acherim. The Acherim say that you need to have a bean volume, and so that is completely consistent with Rav if you were talking about a shomer. So as a result, both views work. So we can work in either way, and we're totally fine. But really, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Rabbi Yochanan? So how would Rabbi Yochanan deal with it? So Amar, he would say, Kula b'shomer. He would say that it's got to be that the whole thing is talking about a shomer. V'huda amar kacherim. It's talking about a shomer because, and he says that it doesn't make a difference what the volume is. Even less than a bean would be sufficient. And he's agreeing with the acherim. Now you may be thinking to yourself, what are you talking about? The acherim say it needs to be a bean, and Rabbi Yochanan says even less than a bean. Well, that's exactly the Gemara's next question. Acherim ha-kefol kamri. They specifically say you need to have a bean. No, I need to come or Tanakama Shiura. No, really, the Acherim do not have any opinion as to a minimum volume. There is no minimum volume, but rather because the Tanakama mentioned a minimum volume, Ka'amri Inhu Nami Shiura, they also gave a minimum volume. But in fact, they don't care about the minimum volume at all, and so as a result, they would say that although they say explicitly a bean, they don't really mean it. Amarava daiganami de b'shomer askinan. And you know what? I can show you that we're talking about a shomer because the katani kulis, because we talked about a thigh bone, and a thigh bone has marrow in it. And so as a result, it is naturally going to be a shomer. So shmamina, in fact, you are right. It is reasonable to say that we're talking about a shomer in this brisa, and therefore we have to explain it based on the shomer. Meaning that Rav would say that the acherim are being specific, and he agrees with the acherim. And Rabbi Yochanan would say, no, the acherim are not being specific, and when they say a bean, they actually mean anything even smaller. And Itmar, we have a debate along these exact lines because Rabbi Chanina Amar Zehu Shir. Rabbi Chanina says that when the acherim gave the volume of a bean, they meant it as a minimum volume. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and Rabbi Yochanan says exactly what we'd expect. Ein zeshir. This is not a minimum volume, and as a result, that's the point. And so again, we ask, Ein zeshir v'aktani kafol, but how could you say that it's not a shear when it specifically says at the end of that brisa that the acherim say that you need to have at least a bean size? Aidi de Kamer Tanakama Shiura, Kamri Inhu Nami Shiura. Now, because the Tanakama referenced a real shear, they also wanted to mention a size, even though the size is lav dafka, is not actually necessary. Okay, so that is the second challenge. And now we are up to the third challenge of Rav's opinion. And again, each of these, although their phrases challenges to Rav's opinion, we've seen that in fact they also, to some extent, we have to explain it according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Tashma, here's the next one. Rabbi Lazar, the next one actually, and then I think even the next two are really only according to Rav and not according to Rabbi Yochanan. But here we go. Tashma. Here's the next case. Rabbi Lazar. This is a Mishnah. There's a Mishnah in Uktzin, fifth Mishnah in the first parak. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah. And I should note, we're going to do a Rashi here that will tell us the background
Oh, wow.
for this Mishnah, because we have excerpted, the Gemara has excerpted this Mishnah and is picking up in the middle, as sometimes the Gemara does. So the background is that we're talking about a bean inside its pod. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, mitaher b'shel pol. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says, you know what? A bean in its pod is actually going to be tahor. And you might be thinking, well, I don't understand. Isn't the pod a shomer? And therefore, it shouldn't, and we're dealing with a case where the pod of the bean itself is small. Obviously, it's bean size. It has a bean, but it's not an olive size, and certainly not an egg size. And then the situation is where the pod completes the size and makes the whole thing an egg size. And so, notwithstanding that, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah says that actually the bean in its pod is going to be tahor. And Rashi explains, second Y line on Kuf Yud Tet Aleph, at the bottom of the daf. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah mitayar b'shomer shel pol, that he's saying that this is going to be tahor despite it being a watcher, but despite the pod being a protector for the bean. Delav shomerhu, because it's not a true protector. Kigon otan hasharvitin, like those pods, shapolim gadlin bahen, like the pods that the beans grow in. Kosht belaz, mibnesha polin gasin, because these beans that we're talking about are fat, they're wide, they're big. Ve'ein srichin l'shomer. You don't need to watch them. The point is the philosophy of the owner matters. And here, an owner is not going to be concerned about the bean getting dirty. Denoach l'mash mishan. It's easy to move them around. Ulanakran, and to clean them. Lefikach ein shomer zeh machnes umotzi umitzdarib. So as a result, even though you could call the pod of this large bean a protector, it is not a protector from a halachic perspective, according to Rabbi Elazar. Kishar shomrim, like it's not a protector like other kinds of protectors. And so therefore, he says that it's tahor in that situation. We don't add it all together, and therefore it's not going to convey or contract. Umetami bishel kitness. But when it comes to a small bean, well then, because he wants it in order to handle it, in order to be able to handle the bean, because he doesn't want the bean to get dirty and it's hard to handle and hard to clean, so then it would constitute a shomer. And so now let's take a look at Rashi b'mash mishan, who's also going to give us the background to this Mishnah and tell us what the Tanakama in that Mishnah thought. B'mash mishan, last word on the fourth wide line. Shemashmesh behen al yedei hashar bitan, that you handle them through the pod. The Resha and the beginning of this Mishnah, the Hachmas Nisan of this Mishnah, Haki, it's the following: Sharbit Sharekano tahor. If you have a pod that has nothing in it, of course it's tahor because there's no food present. Shiarbo gargir echad. If even one bean is left in it, well then tameh. Then it's tameh because you add the pod to the bean, and we have the requisite side. And now the vav of the shita mikubetzes clarifies that it's the kagon sheyesh beina sharvit ba'apol kibetza, and we're dealing with a situation where between the pod and the bean you have an egg volume of stuff, and that's why it's going to be able to both contract tuma and convey tuma. And Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah metaher b'shel pol. Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, again, as we saw in the Gemara itself, in our Gemara, says that when it comes to the larger bean, it's going to be tahor. De'ein shomer mitztarif, because this shomer is not going to add to the volume l'kabetza, to constitute a full egg's volume. Umitame b'shel kitnios, but when it comes to the smaller beans, it's going to be included. Alma yesh shomer lepachot mikafol. But the bottom line is, and this is the key element, and this is why it's a question specifically on Rav, is that this Mishnah is effectively saying, according to Rebbe Lazar ben Azariah, that it's definitely true that you're going to have a shomer for something that's smaller than a regular bean, because the end of this Mishnah is explicit, umitame b'shel kitnis, that we're talking about that when it's a very small bean, it's going to be a problem. So here's the answer. Keda'amar Rav Acha Brei de Rava. Actually, Rav Acha explains this Mishnah. So we're back in the Gemara, just to be clear. 1, 2, 3, 7 lines up from the bottom of the daf of Kuf Yotet Amud Aleph, and we say, no, it's all Keda'amar Rav Acha Brei de Rava. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, actually interprets this Mishnah not to be about pods, but rather bikulcha. It's about stems. It's about branches. Umishum yad. And this is all talking about a yad. And so as a result, hachanami bekocha umishum yad. Now, he makes that original statement elsewhere, but we're going to apply that statement to this case. Umay b'mashmishan. And what does it mean to handle them? B'tashmishan. It means to move them. It means to move them as a yad would move. And so it's not about a mashmishan of handling for protection, but rather it's a tashmishan of handling for movement. And so as a result, that's what that Mishnah is talking about. Don't think it's talking about shomer. It's rather all talking about a handle. And now that we say that it's a handle, well then, even though this particular pod, it may only have one bean in it, the handle, the branch, is holding multiple pods. And across all of the pods, there is an egg volume, or at least an olive's volume of bean. And so as a result, the answer is that now this is consistent with Rav, because we're not talking about a single bean in one pod, which is how we originally interpreted this Mishnah, but rather we're talking about a single bean in one pod among multiple pods with lots of beans in them. And so as a result, given that we have one yad, all of the pods and the beans within them get aggregated, and therefore it's all going to be consistent with Rav. Tashma, last and final challenge of Rav. The Tanav Devei Rabbi Yishmael, it was taught a brisa in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael, Al kol zera zerua. So it says, upon any seed of a seed plant, kederach shebnei adam motzian. Yeah, you do it in the way. We're talking about, again, this pasuk, which we cited yesterday and the day before, is about protectors, is about shomrim. And it tells us that a shomer applies. Remember, we said that it references zera 3 times, once for seeds, once for trees, once for other kinds of food, meat, eggs, and fish. And so in any event, but the point is that we're now going to focus on the seed element of it. And what does it mean? It's just as you take it out for planting. Chita b'klipasa, a wheat in its husk. Usaora b'klipasa, a barley in its husk. Va'adashim b'klipasan, and a lentil in their husk. Well, all of these are pretty darn small when you talk about the item and its husk. As Rashi points out, Adashim b'klipasan, focusing just on the last of them, Alma yesh shomer lebakot mikavol. It shows that there must be a shomer for something that is smaller than a bean, because a lentil is smaller than a bean, a wheat kernel is smaller than a bean, and a barley kernel is all smaller than a bean. And so the Gemara answers, Birya Shani. No, the way, if it's a full item, a whole lentil, it doesn't matter. It qualifies as a shomer. Rav would agree that when it comes to Birya, it's going to be sufficient even in that situation. Okay, so boy, Rav Oshia. So now Rav Oshia asks the question that is somewhat related to the topic that we've been talking about, which is Shnei Shomrim Ma'oshi Yitztarfu. What's the story if you have two protectors for an item? Or maybe it's an item that is split in half and you have a protector for each half. Are we going, and they're together? Are we going to say that all of it combines? Or do we say no, it's only a shomer if it's a shomer for the entire item? And so as a result, we won't add everything together. And so we'll allow the shomer to cover half, the one half of the item, the half shomer of half the item to cover that half of the item, and the other shomer to cover it, but we won't aggregate the whole thing together. So, Heikidami, what exactly is this case? Now we're going to get to the example that I just gave you, but before we get there, we're going to try something else. If you say that we're dealing with one shomer on top of another shomer, so we have multiple layers of shomrim. So you have, for example, a nut that has one covering and then a cover over that. So umi ika shomer al gav shomer, but do we say that there's a shomer on top of another shomer? Vatanan, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, we have a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah in Uktzin, second parak Mishnah Dalid, where it says shalosh klipot bivatzal. You have three layers, three outer layers of an onion. Pnimis, the innermost of those layers, that is considered like food itself. Bein shlema, bein kedura mitzdarefes. Well, it's part of the food itself, and so as a result, it's going to count towards the measurement of the onion for all purposes, whether it's whole, whether it's not whole, whether it's got holes in it, doesn't make a difference. Emsa'i, the middle layer, is the actual peel. Shlema mitzarefes. Well, when it's whole, it's protecting it. Kedura ain mitzarefet. But when it's got holes in it, it's not going to combine because it's not providing any protection because there are holes in it. Chitzona, the outer one, bein kach ubein kach Torah. No matter what, it doesn't do a shomer job because the layer inside of that is doing the shomer job. And so as a result, it's nothing. And so as a result, that's why it will always be tahor and you can't convey tuma with it. So that, and the bottom line is that we see that outer layer is a shomer al gabi shomer and it's all tahor. So clearly, there's no concept of shomer al gabi shomer. So that can't be the example. So what is the question that Rabbi Oshia is asking at? But is the following. Rabbi Oshia shomer ochel shilchuko kamin baile. He's talking about a shomer that is protecting food that has been divided. Kaven da high lo magin ahai, v'hai lo magin ahai, lo mitzdarefes. Do we say that, well, look, the half that is protecting, the shomer that's protecting this half is not protecting this half, and therefore we're not going to, and similarly, the half that's protecting this half is not protecting this half, and therefore we're going to treat them completely separate? Or do we say, oh, Dilma, Kaven Dahai Magin Adide, Vahai Magin Adide, Mitzdarvin? Or do we say, no, this half is being protected by this shomer, this half is being protected by this shomer. They are all part of the same thing. And so as a result, when they're all together, even though this half is not protecting this half and this half is not protecting this half, we're going to say we're treated all as one item. And so as a result, maybe they combine. So Tashma, our effort to answer this question, we're going to have two efforts. So Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah mitaher b'shel po. Well, what about our example of the Mishnah that we cited in Uktzin? Was this Mishnah 5 in first parak of Uktzin that we saw a few moments ago? Umitami b'shel kitnis, where he says that it's going to cause a problem with a small bean, and so as a result, if it's going to, they should rota mishmash mishan because the owner wants to use that pod in order to handle it. Well, if we're dealing with pods, and the small bean, clearly we must be aggregating one small bean in one pod and another small bean in another pod in order to get to the minimum volume. So Amar of Acha Brei Derava, no, Bekulcha Umishum Yad. No, you're wrong. It's not that we're aggregating two shomrim with the little beans, but rather we are dealing with a situation where there is a branch, a stem that's holding multiple pods, and that's why you already have the necessary volume all being attached. And so therefore it all works. And it's not going to be a situation of two separate shomrim. They're all shomrim together. Umay b'mashmishan, b'tashmishan. And when we say to handle them, we don't mean to protect them, but rather to use them as a handle. So tashma, effort number two. The Tana debe Rabbi Yishmael al kol zera zerua. Again, citing that same brisa that we cited as the fourth question on Rav. Kederach shebnei adam motziin lizriya. Again, the way you bring out a seed for sowing. And chita b'klipasa, usora b'klipasa, ba'adashim b'klipasan. And so as a result, we're seeing that we have a shomer in this situation combining with a very small amount of food. And so doesn't it mean that we have multiple beans, multiple lentil beans, or multiple kernels in order to aggregate to the necessary food volume? No, not necessarily. And this is where he made his original statement. No, it's because it's all got a stem and it's got a handle. So I'm sorry. This is not where he made his original statement. He made his original statement in the last case, in the case of the Mishnah and Uktzin. But now we can apply this Mishnah, that answer over here, just as we answered by the Mishnah in Uktzin. We answered that here we're talking about a stem. So Hakanami b'shidra umishom shomer. Here too, we could be talking, when it comes to the kernels of grain, we're talking about a spine of basically the stalk of a grain, and it's going to serve as a shomer for the pieces of grain because having them attached helps protect them. So Bishlam yasa well, fine. I understand that the upper kernels depend on the lower kernels because if the lower kernels fall off, well, then the upper kernels will also fall off. Elatach my yasa. How do the upper kernels get protected by the lower kernels? In which case, those lower kernels should have a too small a volume and not be counted. No, bechad dara. We're talking about where all the kernels are on the same row. So they're all dependent on one another. Umiika kebetza oklin bechad dara. Is there going to be such a large amount of kernel within one row of kernels? No, bechite de Shimon ben Shetach. No, it's like the kernels of Shimon ben Shetach, and that's based on the Gemara in Tanis, Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, where Rabbi Shimon ben Shetach, there was abundant rainfall, and the wheat grew to kernels that were the size of the kidneys of a large ox. Okay, and so yes, if you take a look at Rashi 3, how did I know to do this? 8 lines up. Chite de Shimon ben Shetach. Kishtei klayot, like they were like 2 kidneys. Shel shor hagadol, like a large ox. But Mesechas Tanis, Daf Kav Gimel Amud Al. So that's the source. So Hasha to us is lahachi chadachi denami b'chidei de Shimon ben Shetach. Well, now that you gave us that answer and you said that we could talk about the kernels of Shimon ben Shetach, well, now we could say that it's one kernel and everything is fine. Okay. So now let's go back to that brisa that I cited at the very beginning of today, where we had 2 bones of a human corpse that were sticking into a house with flesh outside the house and the bones, other end of the bones inside the house. So gufa, shnei atzamos va'alein shnei chatzayis esim. We have 2 bones with 2 half olive size flesh on them. V'hichnas rashen shnayim lebayis, and the second end is in the house. The other end is in the house. V'abayis ma'el alein, and now there's a roof over those 2 ends, so it's all going to get combined. V'abayis tamei, the house is going to be tamei because the flesh gets drawn in by the bone and then aggregated by the house, and you're all fine. And you're all bad because the house is tummy. Yehuda ben Nekuza Omer, Mishum Rabbi Yaakov. Yehuda ben Nekuza says in the name of Rabbi Yaakov that Heich Shnei Atzamos Mitzdarfin L'Kazayas. How can 2 separate bones combine into one kazayas? So Amaresh Lakish Lo Shano Ella Etzem. We're talking about a bone to have a yad. It's got to be a yad. Aval Nima Lo have a yad. But when it comes to a a bone, that can constitute a yad of something, but a hair, one single strand of hair, cannot. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu nima nami havya yad. No, even a single strand of hair, we at least at this moment think that that's what he means, is going to also constitute a yad because you can use that strand of hair to pull the meat to you, even though it might break. We're going to deal with that momentarily. So, Eisei Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan asks Reish Lakish, or sheyesh alav kazayas basar. If you have a skin, a hide that has a meat, an olive-sized meat of it, hanogea, and this is from a Mishnah on Daf Kuf Chaf Dalid Amud Aleph. Hanogea b'tziv hayotze mimenu. If you touch a little bit, a small amount of meat that is protruding from the main meat, ubisara shekenegdo, or a hair that is growing opposite the meat, tameh, you're tameh. So my la mishum yad, isn't this because it's all the hair point is the key point? Isn't that because it's a yad? And so as a result, I'm right that a single hair can be a yad? Lo, Rish Lakish says no. Mishum shomer, that hair is constituting a shomer. It protects the meat that is on the other side of the hide. So umiika shomer al gabi shomer. But 1 second, that hair is on the other side of the hide, and so as a result, it's one protector on top of another protector. So isn't that not a good shomer? So no, chalchule mechalchel. No, it's the hair pierces the hide and actually goes down through the hide. And so as a result, the hair follicle actually does protect the meat. So Maskif lo Rav Acha bar Yaakov. So Rav Acha asked, Elamiata tefillin hekik kasfinan. How do you write anything? How do you write tefillin? Because habe'inan ksiva tama veleka, you need a writing that is complete, meaning without any holes in it. And so as a result, if you have these holes from the hair, well, then now you have real holes and it can't constitute writing. So ishtamite to say had amri b'marav, but he forgot. Rav Acha forgot what they said in Eretz Yisrael. Kol nekev shahadyo over alav eno nekev. If the ink effectively covers the hole, well, then it's not a real hole. And so as a result, and this is actually a halacha, that it's not a real hole. And so as a result, these holes are so small, the ink just covers it. It doesn't make a difference. V'bayasema, kule mishum yad. Now we go back and we can actually answer that. That was all answer number one, that it's actually talking about a shomer, that the hair is considered a shomer. But we can also say, you know what? Actually, the situation, the hair is also a yad. But we're not dealing with one hair, but rather Keda'amar Rabbi Eli. Now, although here it says Rabbi Elah, we're going to see later when we quote this in its original location, it's actually Rabbi Eli, and so the Dikduke Sofrim changed the Gemara here to Rabbi Eli throughout. So Kedamar Rabbi Eli, b'milai shebein hamilayim. It's like a bristle among bristles, meaning we'll see what that's referring to in a moment because we're going to get that original source shortly. But hakanami b'nima shebein animin. When we say that there is a hair that you're touching on the other side of the hide, we're not talking about one single hair. We're talking about lots of hair. And when you have lots of hair together, well, then now all of a sudden, multiple strands of hair, as we sort of say, to paraphrase Kohelet, although one strand of hair may break, a doubled or tripled strand of hair becomes much stronger. And so as a result, that will be able to be used as a yad for the flesh. So, the Hege Inmar to Rabbi Eli. So where was the Rabbi Eli's original statement? It was on the following situation. The Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Uktzin, Mishnah Gimel. So we're doing almost all the entire first parak of Uktzin. Milai should be shilbalim. If you have bristles on a grain, mitamin ve'ena mitztarfin. They can contract tuma, they can convey tuma, but they do not combine, meaning that they're considered like a yad. So milai lemai chazi. But what are those bristles? What are those little hairs of a an ear of grain, what are they good for? You can't actually pull on them to hold anything. So Amar Rabbi Eli, b'milai shebein hamilayim, we're dealing with a situation where you got a bristle among many bristles, and so as a result, yes, they are working. It does all work, and so as a result, the bottom line is that uh, second. My apologies, I did not scroll. Um, and so the bottom line is that we're dealing with a situation where you have multiple hairs, multiple bristles, and that is what allows all of those bristles together to serve as a yad. And so therefore, when you touch one of the bristles, it will convey tuma to the grain, and it will also, if the grain itself is tameh, those bristles will convey tuma to something else. And so, and they are not considered part of the grain because they're only a yad. They are not a shomer. And so, as a result, that explains that Mishnah in Uktzin. So, Lishna Achrina. So, there is another way that this all could have been taught. And it's actually taught instead of about the Mishnah, instead of being taught about this whole debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about a hair and the bone and being able to pull the meat on the other side of the flesh, where it was the brisa that we cited at the bottom of Kuf Yud Chet Amud. Rather than about that brisa, there is some that say the Amrila that I'm sorry, my apologies. Before we get to that, I went too far. Hold on just a second. Some say so. It's, now right here is we're at this question. Some say Lishnachrina Amrila Hachinami Mistabra Mishum Shomer. Some say that actually it makes a lot of sense to say that the hair that we're talking about is a shomer. Because so again, instead of saying that Rabbi Yochanan is asking this question on Reish Lakish, rather we're going to say that it makes sense to say that the Mishnah, which talks about the hair from the nevela, is actually a shomer. It makes sense to say the following. Because if you say that it's a yad, meaning that it should support Reish Lakish, because again, Reish Lakish says that let's go back to the debate, right? So Reish Lakish says lo shanu ella etzem tahavi yad aval nima lo havya yad. That a single hair can't be a yad, but it could be a shomer. And so as a result, we're going to say that it makes sense to say that the hair in that brisa is talking about a shomer situation. So because if you tell me that it's really a yad, nema achat l'maychas, what is one hair good for? So the answer ends up being no. Kedamar Rabbi Eli b'milai shebein amilayin. Just as we say with respect to the bristles, that it's one bristle with multiple. So hachanami b'nima shebein animin. We're talking about one hair among many hairs. V'heichi itmar to Rabbi Eli. Where was that original statement? And now we have for the second time. Ahadetnan. It was about a different Mishnah. It was about the Mishnah which says hamilai shabishibolim mitamin umitamin evein mitztarfin. They can enable tuma to be contracted and convey tuma, but they don't add because they are considered a yad. Milai lamai chazi. But yeah, 1 second. What are those bristles good for? Amar Rabbi Eli, milai shebein milayin. No, they're good for. And it's a little confusing, but also a little bit of a pun that is Rabbi Eli talking about milai. But in anyways, so the bristles are good when there are multiple bristles, because then you can lift the ear by multiple bristles. V'ika demasti law, and then there are those who teach the entire argument about between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan, Amas Nisan. They teach that entire argument about our Mishnah. And so as a result, Ha'or v'harota v'akipa v'chulu mitztarfim l'tamei tumas ochlen. So again, we had in our Mishnah that the hide, the gravy, and the sediment all are going to combine with the food. And what's the implication? Amaresh lakish lo shanu ela etzem. Just the bone is going to be Dahavi Shomer, because the bone is going to be a protector. Aval Nima Lo Havi Shomer. But a hair is not mentioned in our Mishnah, and it's because a hair would not combine with it to constitute the necessary volume, and so as a result, and it's not a shomer, and that's why it's not going to combine with the volume. So for Rabbi Yochanan Amar, no, afilu nima nami havi shomer. No, even a hair, a single hair could be a shomer. So Amarle Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan. So now the answer that we gave before is going to be, and of course it's important to note that the earlier debate was about a yad, that Reish Lakish said that a hair cannot be a yad. And here he's saying a hair cannot be a shomer. And again, whereas Rabbi Yochanan before was saying a hair could be a yad, now Rabbi Yochanan is saying a hair could be a shomer. So it's a little bit of a different argument because now they're arguing about our Mishnah. And our Mishnah is primarily, one of the key topics of our Mishnah is about a shomer, something that protects. So Amar le Reish Lakish le Rabbi Yochanan umi ika shomer al gabi shomer. But so Reish Lakish is now the one doing the asking, and he says to Rabbi Yochanan, "Can there be one shomer on top of another shomer?" So Rabbi Yochanan responds, "Chalchule mechalchel." No, the hair is piercing it, and so it does serve as a shomer because it is protecting the meat directly because it goes through the skin in order to get to the meat. So Maskif lo Rav Acha. So Rav Acha said, "One second, Elamiata tefillin hekik kasvin." And so how can you write tefillin as we asked earlier? Habinan ksiva tama veleka. You need a perfect writing, and you don't have that. Meaning you need a complete writing with no holes in it, and that doesn't exist in this case. But yet ishtamiteh say hada amrim b'ma'arava. But he forgot what they said in Eretz Yisrael because kol nekev shahadiyo over alav eno nekev, because a hole that the ink goes right over is not considered a hole, and any kind of hole that's one hair in width is going to be that kind of hole. It's not going to, the ink is not going to seep through and create a hole, and so as a result, it is a valid tefillin. So Esvei Rabbi Yochanan the Reish Lakish. So now Rabbi Yochanan asks Reish Lakish, what about the Mishnah, which we cited again earlier, Mishnah on Kuf Chaf Dalid Amud Aleph, so another couple of days, or Sheyesh Alav Kazayas Basar, you have a hide that has an olive-sized volume of meat on it. If you touch some of the meat that is protruding, so then of course it's going to be tameh if you're tameh. Ubisara kenegdo, or, and here's the key part, the hair that is growing opposite the meat on the other side of the hide. So tameh, it's tameh. So my lav mishum shomer. Isn't this because it's a shomer? And so, and doesn't that show that I'm right that a hair can be a shomer? Lo, mishum yad. No, it's because it's a yad. It's you use it as a handle. So nema agaz lamai chazia. And so Rabbi Yochanan says back, how can you say that it's a handle? One hair doesn't work as a handle. So as a result, we cite again Rabbi Yulai, Kedamar Rabbi Yulai, b'miloi shebein hamilayin. Just like we have one bristle among multiple bristles, we have one hair among multiple hairs. That's what we're talking about. Multiple hairs together can constitute a yad. Idmar de Rabbi Yulai. Where was that original statement of Rabbi Yulai? Ahadatan. It was on the Mishnah in Uktzin, Mishnah Gimel of the first parak of Uktzin, now cited for the third time. Shibolim, when you have a bristle among grains, mitamin mutamin, it can contract tuma and it can convey tuma. Ve'ein mitzdarfin, and it does not combine. So clearly we're talking about a yad, and it does exactly what a yad can do. And so how is that possible, that a single bristle can constitute a yad? So milai lamai chazia, what good is it? It's going to break if you try to pull one. So I'm a Rabbi Lai, b'milai shebein hamilain. So no, we're talking about where there are multiple bristles, and therefore it can serve as a good handle. And so therefore that we've answered all the questions. Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, each can hold their position. Their positions are consistent with our Mishnah and the Brises, and we end up saying so. We have these two different approaches to the machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and neither of them do we end up with a proof, definitive proof, in favor of either Reish Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan. So our Mishnah mentioned that gravy counts towards food. So the Gemara next analyzes the type of gravy and why it would be counted. But for that discussion, you'll have to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf. Looking forward to continuing to learn together.
Yashakok.
Rotia.
Yes. See you tomorrow, God willing.
Looking forward. I hope that was made more comprehensible, and because it's like I said.